Good morning and good afternoon, dear distinguished guests, faculty, and students. We welcome you to IILM's 8th Principles of Responsible Management Education International Conference. Our theme this year is Planning for a Green Recovery, Business, Technology, and Social Perspectives. IILM has been a signatory of the UN Global Compact Initiative, PRME, since 2008. In September 2013, we were selected as a PRME Champion Business School together with 29 others from all over the world. IILM was the only business school from India and Asia to receive this honor. IILM was also part of a 10-member advisory group to the PRME Secretariat. IILM has also been involved in developing a framework for faculty development for the PRME, a task which IILM had undertaken together with Babson College and the Copenhagen Business School. IILM's commitment to the UN SDGs is reflected in our vision statement of giving access to inclusive and responsible business education. In the pursuit of this goal, courses in sustainability, innovations, and legal frameworks are offered to the students. The year 2020 has been a watershed moment for our planet. The impact has been so unprecedented that we now refer to the world as pre and post-COVID. This also grants to the human race a unique opportunity to start over again with a clean slate and to rethink and rebuild our world. Our 8th conference theme for this year, Planning for a Green Recovery, Business, Technology, and Social Perspectives, emanates from this singular prospect. How do we harness what new ideas, innovations, and our collective zeal to bring about a change for a cleaner planet and a better world? In fact, this year's conference theme takes a leaf out of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's article in the Financial Times, where he talks about green recovery and how green and growth can go hand in hand. To deliberate on this journey of green recovery, we are honored to have with us today Professor Ilian Mihov, Dean of INSEAD and Chair of the PRME Board. He is concurrently the Rosing Chaired Professor of Economic and Business Transformation. Professor Mihov holds a PhD from Princeton University. At INSEAD, he has been recognized several times with the Outstanding Teacher Award. In 2018, he won the UN Women Singapore Chapter He for She Leader Award for his outstanding service and contributions towards gender equality at INSEAD. Under Professor Mihov's leadership, the MBA program at INSEAD has been ranked #1 for the 3rd time in 6 years. It's a privilege and my honor to invite Dr. Ilian Mihov to deliver his keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Banerji, for these kind words. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm really excited about these conferences. As probably some of you know, I joined PRME about, 7-8 months ago as a chair of the board. And the main reason I decided to do this is because I really think that this is a time that we need to change management education, and we have to put a lot of effort. It was a bit ironic because literally 3 weeks before that, I was talking to my coach, my executive coach, and I said, the most important thing for me is to start saying no. No more boards, no more extra work, just focus on what I'm doing. But then when they came and they said, well, you know, we want to restart, rejuvenate PRME, it was just very, tempting, because I think that this is how we can make impact. So as of 17th of June, I'm chairing that board. it's a completely new board, new people. Mette Morsing is our new CEO, and we're trying really to make a big impact. And so organizations like yours, the IILM, are absolutely crucial in delivering what our objectives are. And I'm looking forward to working with you and other schools in India, around the world, to change management education and to make sure that the future leaders have different mindsets and different ways of thinking about what are the priorities and what is needed in order to make the world a better place. So I'm not going to talk about PRME a lot because you know, or as we call it, Prime, actually, it's these days, you know exactly what the organization is. To me, the reason that I got attracted to this position and this job is basically driven by two things. First, I really think that education is key to changing, the world. Very often, there is a lot of focus on, okay, we need this kind of leaders, that kind of leaders, and so on. And I think to a certain degree it's true, but whenever we talk only about the leaders, we're missing the point that sometimes you need also other managers and followers. And when the rest of the organization is not aligned with the leader in what he or she thinks, it's very difficult to make real change. So all these ideas about sustainable development goals, all these ideas about inclusivity, equity, diversity, they have to be embraced by everybody, not just the CEO of the company and a couple of people on the leadership team. So that's why I think that education is very important. The second reason I think I was attracted to this job was because UNGC, which was started 20 plus years ago, to me is the first truly global organization that recognizes the need of business to participate in a very important way in solving these problems. I'm an economist, and economics, as many of you know, we teach that if there are market failures, if there are externalities, then the government should intervene by regulating, setting taxes, creating subsidies, and all kinds of other measures. And I think UNGC is here to recognize that that is not enough. I mean, the governments have a very important role to play still, but if business leaders, managers, if they do not embrace these movements towards either it's green recovery or sustainable economy, then they'll figure out how to circumvent all the regulations, to evade taxes. It will be a game that I don't think that we will win. So we need to change business. We need to change business education. We need to change the mindset of all these people. So that's the vision for Prime, to create this global movement and thought leadership on responsible management education. And to transform business and management education is our mission, by developing responsible leaders for today and tomorrow. And we're still working on the mission and the vision for Prime. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks to design the strategy and to engage much more with the community wherever our members are. So I want to talk about business as a force for good. I started at INSEAD in 1996 as a professor of economics, or assistant professor of economics at the time. And since 2013, I have been appointed as Dean of INSEAD. I'm based in Singapore, the first Dean of INSEAD based in Asia. All my predecessors were based in Fontainebleau, including your compatriot Deepak Jain was my predecessor, and we worked with him, but he was based in Fontainebleau. And I think it's actually an important statement for the school as well, to say that we are a global school and Asia is important. But going back to my appointment, from the very beginning, the board asked me, how do you think about the mission and the vision for the school? What do you think that INSEAD will be 10, 20 years from now? And it's a difficult question because when you're used to only teaching economics, monetary policy, interest rates, growth, and all these things, all of a sudden thinking about missions and visions, and it's not easy. But I developed with my leadership team the idea that our mission has to be based on business as a force for good. And I'll explain what I mean by this. And I really like the theme of this session today, the planning for green recovery, because I will talk about business, about technology, and about social perspectives. So these three things, I think, are very much intertwined. I will talk about the past, the present, and the future, because I think that today we have a much more difficult task, I think, than what probably our predecessors had, in the following sense. We are responsible today to change the way that we do things, to change our mindsets, to change, to recover some of the lost ground in terms of environmental sustainability, social inequality, and so on. But also today, because of the advancement of artificial intelligence and all these other digital technologies, we have to ask the question, what lies ahead of us? So we cannot just think and act reactively. We have to be proactive, and we have to preempt some of these forces that might change the world in a completely unexpected way. So I'll talk a little bit about technology and innovation, about the dynamics and the dialectics between business and society. And I will argue that change is coming. Our role is not so much to figure out how to change things, but how to make this change less painful and how to accelerate this change. Because I'm very optimistic that things will change, but whether that will be painful or smooth will depend on us. So when I talk about, I mean, as an economist, of course, I have to put at least one macro graph here. So this is the world GDP per capita at purchasing power parity. So in real terms, so adjusted for inflation from, there is no year zero, but I like putting zero there. So year 1 AD until roughly today. The data is taken from the World Bank and from Angus Madison's book. And you can see from this graph that it's quite shocking that for the first 18th century in this period, not much growth happened. And that's true actually for the previous many, many thousands of years. So in fact, if you calculate the average growth rate is about 0.02%. And then something happened in the beginning of the 19th century. And today we have seen amazing growth of 2.2%. And incomes have increased from about 1,300 to about 18,000 or so in just a matter of 200 years. So that's stunning. Growth is a new phenomenon. It has not been with the world for a very long period of time. Only 200 years of changes in economic well-being and changes in economic welfare. Now, when we look at this graph, we always start asking the question, what happened in the 18th, 19th century, and how did this miracle happen? And we're mesmerized by the technological advances, by the discoveries, the steam engine, the use of the steam engine on trains, and then the electricity and light bulbs and telephone. So many things happened in the 19th century. But very often in this historical account, we forget that there were a lot of other things that happened in the 19th century that were a direct result of this industrialization. There were rebellions, there was child labor. In 1848, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, and they didn't dream out manifesto, they actually wrote it because they saw what was around, what were the implications of this industrialization for the workers. And then it paved the way for very oppressive regimes around the world in the 20th century. Originally I'm from Bulgaria, so actually I lived 24 years of my life in socialist countries. So I've experienced this. So there were a lot of things in the 19th century that were associated with this industrialization that are not necessarily amazing things. In fact, industrialization was accompanied with social disruption and social unrest and hunger and blood and so on. You know, not only this, but if you look only at Britain, at the UK at the time, in the 19th century, they had, I think, about 34 different wars all over the world. There were wars in Asia, wars in New Zealand, wars in Africa, in Americas, and so on. And, you know, this is something when you start thinking why they're doing these things. And the answer is, well, because you need to fuel the industrialization. You need all these resources. We somehow leave this behind in discussing the miracle of economic growth. And then the 20th century was even more shocking and actually more transformational in many ways. You know, nuclear fusion, DNA, people traveling to space, flying around, internet, computers, semiconductors. But of course, we know that in the background of all these, there were two world wars, there was the rise of fascism, and Cold War and so on. So why am I saying all these things? You know, how do they relate to green recovery of the future? Well, because all these industrial revolutions that we've seen in the past, we now realize that they have also had other consequences and side effects that might not be so nice and pleasant. And therefore, we have to think, are we now on the verge of another one of these things? And we are facing what some people would call the fourth industrial revolution. Again, the first one usually is considered to be the steam engine, what happened in the 18th and 19th century. Then mass production is associated with the second industrial revolution. The automation is the third one. And now the combination of cyber and physical systems is considered to be the fourth industrial revolution. And we don't know how things will change because in the past, a lot of these industrial revolutions have substituted physical labor with machines and have facilitated a lot of the physical work and maybe some intellectual work, but mostly to add and to help people make decisions. Today, the new industrial revolution seems to be substituting a lot of the intellectual work that people are doing. You know, Yuval Harari, who I will quote later today as well. But when he looked at this, he said, you know, basically humans can do two things. You know, we can move things around and then we can think. And it's great that, you know, the physical labor was replaced, but now when we start replacing intellectual labor, what do we do? And again, I don't know the answer because, you know, in economics, we always say, well, you know, people are very skeptical of the first, the second, the third industrial revolution. They were always saying, you know, all these saboteurs and Luddites and, you know, the Unibombers and so on who are against technology were wrong. At the end of the day, technology created much more jobs than destroyed. And it's very easy to prove. And I always, in my classes, I always bring, you know, historical references and data just to prove points like this. But sometimes you have to question, or you have to ask at least the question, you know, is history always a guide for the future? And is the future might be different from what we have observed in the past? So that worries me a little bit. You know, in the United States, I think it was in 29 out of 50 states, according to the Census Bureau, the most the most popular job is delivery and truck driving in 29 out of 50 states. I have some of our alumni were bragging that they have invested in 3 companies that are trying to make truck driving autonomous. So you start thinking, what will these people do? You know, how do they change? And that's, again, I don't know the answer to the question. I have seen what Singapore has done, you know, amazing job in the Skills Future program in retraining everybody, trying to be ahead of the curve and making sure that everybody has the skills, the knowledge, the capabilities to be part of the new economy. But it's still unclear how far this can go. There is actually a wonderful book by Max Tegmark, who is a professor at MIT, and it's called Life 3.0. And in his book, I mean, it's Life 3.0 because Life 1.0 is the basic reproduction. Life 2.0 are humans, basically that besides reproduction, you also can upgrade your software along the way. So learn, you know, different languages, learn all kinds of things and so on. And Life 3.0 is the upgrade of the software and hardware. So merging the digital and physical. So to me, it's actually one of probably the most interesting books about artificial intelligence and the possibilities. He describes several different scenarios. What are possible outcomes in the next 20, 30 years? When will artificial intelligence, when will it reach this singularity, as people in the Silicon Valley call it, you know, where, you know, machines become better than humans. And it's a very interesting book, and I don't want to try to summarize it in 3 minutes. But the most important lesson to me from this book is basically the question how the world will look like in the next 20, 30, 50, 100 years depends on us, not on anybody else. We choose what to do and how to design the future of this world. There is, of course, one option to say, let's just leave it to the market and the market will figure out how to allocate resources efficiently and so on. But Professor Tegmark warns very carefully that that might not be the best outcome at the end of the day. And by the time we realize it's not the best outcome, it might be an irreversible outcome. So we really have to start thinking about this now. And that's why I said that we have a role to play in reversing some of the damage that we have done to the environment and biodiversity and so on. But also we have to look forward and to see how can we protect the world from going through volatility, going through wars during this new industrial revolution. Okay, so now let me go to business as a force for good. So this, I wanted to talk, so this was the first pillar, the technology, the innovation, and all these dynamics. When I talk about business as a force for good, in the beginning, I always talked about how economic growth is essential in driving down poverty. And I used to give this example with China. I hope that, you know, because I think it's the most impressive example, but of course we know that India as well in the past 20, 30 years has achieved also tremendous success in fighting poverty. And I really hope that, you know, this fight accelerates. It's a big thing that the world has to grapple with in the coming years, as you know, one of the SDGs. So in China, usually, you know, the statistic that I give is that in 1980, and that's not even on this graph, but in 1980, there were 850 million people who lived below the extreme poverty line of $1.90 a day. That was about 85% of the Chinese population at the time. 2013, you see it's 26 million. And in fact, there was an article in The Economist a month ago that extreme poverty is history in China, as the officials say. So it's been eradicated. And that's a miracle. I mean, what is happening in countries like China and India and in some African countries, unfortunately not all, is something that has never happened on this scale before. This is, I think this is really encouraging, but we have to understand what is really happening. So when you look at what happened in China, this poverty went down not because of philanthropic giving, not because of foreign developmental aid from the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, not because of subsidies, but because of one thing, that is economic growth. And at the end of the day, the only engine of economic growth is business creation. If you don't have businesses, who owns these businesses is a different question. But in general, if you don't have business that creates jobs, builds factories, you don't have growth. And it's impossible to reduce poverty in a sustainable way. There are a lot of other measures to reduce poverty, and I think it's very important, but they're not really sustainable if they're not underpinned by economic growth. So business as a force for good has one very narrow core interpretation, and that is to say business creation leads to economic growth, and that leads to reduction in poverty. So when I discussed this the first time, I said to the board and some alumni, look, you know, our mission is very simple. We're a global business school. We brand ourselves as the business school for the world. Our mission is to bring together all these smart people from all over the world, develop their skills, develop them as future leaders, managers, entrepreneurs, send them back to their country so they can generate growth and transform societies and eradicate poverty. And it was a beautiful story, but somehow we realized that the general public does not really buy this story entirely. And here is basically what we realized, that there is a tension. Even as billions around the world have much better living standards than 40 years ago, trust in business has eroded. And the tension between business and society has been increasing in the past. I don't have to explain why, because I think we already, all of us know the answer to the question why. There are obviously market failures, there are environmental crises, there are corporate scandals. I mean, it started with Enron, but there is Volkswagen, there are tons of scandals out there that we can list here. So business does create jobs, but also there are negative effects that business creates in the society. And the world is not happy with this. There are more and more protests with titles like this: capitalism is not working, another world is possible. Greta, of course, became, you know, a celebrity with her strike for climate. The young generation is not going to accept what we have been doing, and I think we need them in order to help us change, and all these other movements. You know, I always look at Edelman and their trust barometer, because they do these really great studies of what the public thinks about business, about governments, and so on. And last year, the barometer was saying that 56% of the general public believes that capitalism, as it exists today, does more harm than good in the world. And not only this, but I think that it was about 60% of the general public believes that CEOs are driven by greed more than by desire to have a positive impact. And when you face this disbelief and mistrust in business, we as business schools who are training all these people, we have to ask the question, what do we need to do? Again, Financial Times last time actually for the first time since I've been reading this newspaper, I saw something like this, you know, the cover page, you know, capitalism time for a reset with a new agenda by the editor and so on. You go to Davos, you go to all these places, Larry Fink from BlackRock, Mark Benioff, the Business Roundtable, Jamie Dimon, all these people are talking about the need to change capitalism. In Davos last year, there was a new manifesto that was accepted by the World Economic Forum that the company is more than an economic unit generating wealth. It fulfills human and societal aspirations as part of the broader social system. Performance must be measured not only on the return to shareholders, but also on how it achieves its environmental, social, and good governance objectives. So there is a lot of talk, a lot of discussion on these issues today. Is there any real change happening? I think that there is. What is, however, disappointing is the speed at which these changes are happening. So to me, today, when we say, what does it mean business as a force for good? I would still insist that there is a core interpretation, a narrow interpretation, let's put it this way, that business creates jobs and generates growth and leads to people escaping poverty. But also there is a need for a broader interpretation, and that is to accept that in the process of value creation for the company, we have to think about the impact our decisions have on society and the environment. And probably one of the most important realizations that I had in the last 4 years, and I'm sure that many of you had this realization much earlier than me, but one of the most important things is actually given by the quote from *Sapiens*, from Yuval Harari's book. There is a chapter called Imagine Realities. And here is a quote from this chapter. Ever since the cognitive revolution, sapiens have been living in a dual reality. On the one hand, the objective reality of rivers, trees, and lions, and on the other hand, the imagined reality of gods, nations, and corporations. As time went by, the imagined reality became ever more powerful. So today, the very survival of rivers, trees, and lions depends on the grace of imagined entities such as the United States and Google. And when you read the chapter, you realize how much of our behavior is driven by norms that we have created. They're not, written in stone. They're not physical laws. They're not biological laws. These are norms that we have created. And we have seen these norms persist for a very long period of time. And we have the inertia not to change them, even though we realize that the outcomes are not the right ones. At INSEAD, 2 years ago, actually already 3 years ago, we are celebrating 50 years of the first female MBA graduates. I joined in '67, graduated in 1968, two women. And I was thinking a lot about this at the time. And then you realize that in the 50s and the 60s, the accepted norm was that women do not go to business schools. In the United States, actually, the top universities started accepting women only in the beginning of the 70s. Like Princeton, where I graduated from. And today you realize this is outrageous. This is just such a stupid thing. But at the time, this was the norm. And in the same way in which we find this norm completely unacceptable, abhorrent, in the same way, the next generation will look at us and say, how could they live with this? How could they accept that, a company can do all these things to the environment and its people just to make more profit? I'm pretty sure that the next generation will be very, very harsh on us, and they already are. And I think that we need to we need to react to all this. So all these norms that we have been creating and we have been following, they need a new rethinking. So in the 17th, 18th century, there were a lot of philosophers thinking about the social contract between the government and the citizens. You know, Thomas Hobbes, and here you have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, and so on. And the big question was, why would I, as a citizen, give up my natural rights, as they were calling them, so that they actually govern me? And the answer is, well, because in exchange of this, there's a social contract that the government will protect you, and there'll be law and so on. So there are all these discussions of this. So 400 years of an amazing research on the social contract between the government and its citizens, implicit or explicit. Today, we need a different social contract. Businesses have become an essential part, bigger part of the world than many governments around the world, and they're more powerful and they're more impactful in our lives and for the environment. They have to enter and be part of this social contract. We give, you know, if we believe that the humanity owns the planet, the environment, the clean air, and so on, and it belongs to all of us and the future generations, we give it for free, and then we have to demand something in return, and that is preservation. So we need a new social contract along these lines. As I said, you know, I'm an optimist, so I think there are a lot of companies that are doing these things, so I think a change is coming. Here, I give as an example Novozymes, but there are a lot of other great companies that are thinking and devoting resources to this. Novozymes is a Danish company, and I think that what is really exciting about that company is that the board has decided that the CEO is responsible for the financial results, and he will get his financial remuneration if the results are better. But in his current contract, he has a coefficient in the calculation, in the formula that calculates his bonus. And that formula basically says it's a coefficient between 0 and 1. And if you don't meet your social environmental objectives, then the coefficient is 0. If you meet them fully, it's 1. So the bonus is related to how much you meet the observations. And I think that you don't necessarily have to do this, but actually incentives do work. And Novozymes is one of the greenest companies out there. Now, with all this, what can we do? What is the role of business schools? What is my role now in Prime? What am I trying to change? And I think that our role, let me tell you what we did at INSEAD. Our role is actually to start thinking about all these issues, and not in isolation, not only about the environment and pollution and the carbon tax, but about all these things that are not working right, and change the mindset of the future leaders, managers, entrepreneurs, to change the way that they approach problems and solve problems. So many other universities, many other schools have centers and have institutes on these issues, and they might be similar or they might be different from what we do. But I want to say that for me, it's the general mindset that we need to change. It is not just one thing. It's not just pollution, and it's not just gender equality or inequality. It is a way of thinking about the unintended consequences of our actions and integrating this into our decision making. So we set up the Hoffman Institute about 3 years ago with several different streams: ethics, gender balance, humanitarian operations, social impact. wealth inequality, sustainability, tech for good, and we continue enlarging these topics, so they're naturally bigger. At the center are the SDGs, because when I think about the SDGs, it is basically an attempt to address the failures of the market system. And when you look at this, there are either market failures or their externalities or policy failures. You know, when you look at poverty, poverty exists there because there is a policy failure, and many cases market failures. When you look at clean water and sanitation, it's an externality that we create through our activities and so on. At the center, maybe deliberately, the creators of the goals put at the center number 8 in the middle, economic growth, which we still need, but all these others are consequences, conditions for this growth, and it's also our framework. And I believe 100% in goal 17 that we can resolve these things and we can actually create a much better world if we focus on partnerships between NGOs, between governments, between business. I don't want to sound like I'm saying that business is the only solution to this. To the contrary, there are many cases where if you don't even the playing field for all the players, a company that is well-intentioned and a CEO who wants to do something good, he or she may drive the company into bankruptcy if they just deviate from what others are doing. So governments have to intervene and say, well, you know, this is the new playing field. And governments have been successful. You know, when you think about the Clean Air Act in the United States in the early 70s, or in general, I mean, I don't know how many of you have seen this in India, but I've seen it in Bulgaria. In my early childhood, the bigger issue was sulfur dioxide, not carbon dioxide. And my mother is from a small town in the southern part of Bulgaria. Yeah, we're waking up every morning there with a very thick smoke of all kinds of chemicals. You even don't know what they were at the time. But with the Clean Air Acts around the world, you know, today, most of the developed countries don't even think about this thing. So I think that governments, NGOs raising awareness, governments making policy and regulation, but businesses also embracing this and pushing it further is the only solution to all this. At INSEAD also, you know, how do we do this? Because I think that it's an interesting question. You can obviously introduce this in a lot of courses. We can have a course on sustainability, which we do, an elective course. But when we say we want to change mindsets, we don't want just to give them knowledge in terms of statistics, data, frameworks, but we want them to start thinking in a different way. It's much more difficult than just to give a lecture. So we do a lot of experiential learning classes. In our core strategy class, which is in the beginning now of INSEAD, so when Anjali was there, probably, you know, it was in the 3rd period. Now it's in the 1st one. Because we changed the curriculum and we introduced course on business and society as required courses. But in the 1st period, in the core strategy course, we teach them the basic strategy tools, frameworks, and so on. And then at the end, we say, okay, now compete. And our students, one thing they love the most is competing. Well, actually, maybe there is something else that they love more, but I'm not going to mention these things. I mean, they just love competing with each other. I mean, I think they actually like spending together with each other a lot more than that, but competition is key. So we give them one full day. They have a competition called Master Strategies Day. So they're given a live case where they have to figure out what is the right strategy for this company. This case is written only for one-time use. It will never be used again because it's actually something that you are applying after that. So there must be implementation. And 500 students on 2 campuses in Fontainebleau and in Singapore, supervised by about 20 consultants from Bain, try to design and solve these problems. And the first time we did this in 2018, we had Unjani Clinics, which is a company, an organization in South Africa, set up by nurses to provide healthcare to about 15 million people in South Africa who have no access to healthcare. And they came to us and they said, we have 50 clinics, we're working with subsidies, but we want to be financially sustainable and we want to grow to 1,000 clinics, because with 50 clinics, you cannot provide healthcare to 15 million people. So these are difficult questions, difficult problems, but the students embrace this. 6 months later, 20 of them flew to South Africa. And what you see at the bottom there is actually a class that is delivered by our students on how to implement these strategies. So they learn their strategic tools, how to use them in solving societal problems, in being broader. And I think that actually that's one way to think that we can change mindsets. So I want to finish with this, with Antonio Guterres' quote, which I fully embrace. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to achieve the world's goals, but we cannot do it unless everyone plays their part. We cannot do it without the private sector. Business must deliver on their commitments to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. So to me, business and business education is absolutely central. And without business education and business, I don't think it will make much progress. I will stop here. Thank you very much. I can take a couple of questions if we have the time. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee, and it is indeed a privilege and a pleasure to have the opportunity to hear you, Professor Mihov. Let me say that your presentation has not only just been arresting, it has in fact been quite mesmerizing. I, for one, have been hanging on to every word you've spoken. I know for you, Professor Mihov, you speak a lot at many forums, and for us, though, here in a developing country like India, in an institute like the IILM, every word you say carries a tremendous amount of meaning and inspiration for us. And today, I must say, you've set the platform for resetting, rethinking, reimagining what we as an institute, and perhaps even more broadly, we as a nation need to do in the times to come. Professor, let me also tell you that as a long-time practitioner and somebody who's been in the field of the SDGs and the UN Global Compact, and with PRME for several years now, it is so refreshing, such a happy circumstance that you have come in as chair, the global chair for PRME. We saw in the last 2 years some element of a little bit of a downturn in the system, and we, for one, were quite concerned as to how PRME would come out into its new avatar, rejuvenated. Now we have a new board, we have a new CEO, and we have you. It's wonderful, therefore, to have you with us and this very great audience that's been listening to your every word. I need to ask you just a couple of quick questions. Among all the things you said, the one that really resonated is about what is the role of the business school? And the way you put it as to what INSEAD has been doing. These are inspirational narratives that institutions like IILM, who've been with PRME so faithfully over all of these times when we are doing our 8th conference today, for us, what can we do becomes very, very important. You've told us now how we can try and reset the thinking, the mindset that maybe our faculty, maybe all our students, maybe we as people have. How do we recalibrate that thinking? So I'd like you to expound a little bit more on what maybe it's a microcosmic role, but what can each institution do within itself, within what it conceives as important to further the cause of the PRME?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Chatterjee, for the question, for the comments. I think that it's not easy. It is not easy to address some of these challenges because we, at least for me, we're used to thinking very often in frameworks. And the framework or the shareholder value maximization paradigm is something that is a very neat model, very nice framework, very elegant, and it is true under certain assumptions. And to me, it's not easy because first, we have to realize that it is a social norm. It is the social shareholder value maximization is not God-given truth. It is not a physical law. It is not a biological law. It is something that we have created, which is correct if you assume certain things, like financial capital is the only capital that matters. If this assumption is correct, then this story is right. So what can we do as business schools? I think that the biggest challenge, and I don't think that it is easy to address it, but that's why I'm putting it here, so more of us work on it. The biggest challenge is to create a coherent framework that competes with this one. And it is as elegant, as convincing as the shareholder value maximization, but the assumptions are different. The assumptions include the fact that natural capital matters, that the future generations, the biodiversity matters, and all these things. And I think that it is very difficult. I think that this is one of the things. So there is a lot of research that we need to do, and we need to do it together because, again, questions are difficult. And I can go on into the discussion about impact, risk, return, which discussions I've had for quite some time. The second thing that we need to do, and I'm trying to do now through PRME, through Prime, these things, and it is to say, how can we exchange knowledge and ideas better across schools? Interestingly, when I was presenting some of these things to our staff members 2 years ago, right after we started the Hoffman Institute, and I was saying, I really want the school to move in a different direction. We've always been keen on these things, but not really explicitly. And I said, we have to be explicit and we have to be convinced and convincing that this is the way forward. However, one of the staff members said, but you know what, how are you going to make sure that this is a competitive advantage of the school and as a differentiator? And I said, I don't want it to be a differentiator. I want actually everybody, all the business schools out there, to embrace this, because if we're the only ones doing it, it's not a good thing. Maybe we're wrong then if nobody else is embracing. So for me, the exchange of ideas and then talking to our students and making sure that we hear them what they want, but we also bring all this knowledge about sustainability, about new frameworks, all this thinking, I think that this is what we can do. And unfortunately, I don't have a clear path to say, okay, 1, 2, 3, and we'll be there. But I feel that once we do a lot of this, experiential learning, all these classes, all this exchange of ideas, we may not have a KPI, but once we see it, we will know that we have done it.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for those thoughts. Something that troubles me and a lot of our viewers and listeners who are with us here today, listening to you, is this very graphic slide that you put up about the way that capitalism, for many people, is crumbling. The faith in capitalism is today perhaps at its lowest ebb. And we have seen how the socialist and the communist world literally disintegrated. A whole system just came apart. If capitalism also comes apart, is there a third system? Is something that worries people who are global thinkers, who are policy makers, who are trying to take their countries and maybe this planet in a different direction. So, is the change, for example, from cruel capitalism to conscious capitalism, responsible capitalism, driven by business leaders? We talk of corporates for good, the private sector for good. And it's so wonderful to see that the United Nations as a whole in its SDG platform, for the first time, has moved away from just interacting with governments to now involving the private sector and its leadership in a very big way.
Mhm.
To you, this involvement of the private sector in the way that the, the planet and the globe is moving forward, is this a really important key element?
So yes, absolutely. I mean, first on capitalism, I don't see any other way at this point in time. You know, I've lived through socialist countries. There are people publishing books and criticizing capitalism without offering an alternative. I I just don't understand. You know how it's easy to criticize. We can criticize anything and everything. Um, I think that what is important is after this criticism to say, but this is a better system, and to start thinking what is not working, how to fix it. I do think that most people today, at least most most people I talk to, like Rebecca Henderson at Harvard, you know, is talking about reimagining capitalism. People talk about conscious capitalism, about all these things, and I really think that it is important to retain what has worked and what is working in capitalism. If we skip, uh, if we actually skip this part and we say let's just create a completely new system, you know, we might be experimenting for a decade or two at a very high cost. I mean, that has been done 100 years ago by the Soviet Union, and we realize that later on it just leads to oppression. So I think that there is a lot of positive. One of my colleagues, Subi Rangan, is always talking about integrating performance and progress. So without looking at progress, just looking at performance is not working. And just your last part of your question, private sector is essential. Without private sector, we don't have a solution, in my view. It's you know, all the regulation. You regulate one thing. Companies that do not want to do this, they just go to a different place and they circumvent, they evade taxes, so they evade regulations. So we need private sector. We need the buy-in. We need the conviction of these managers and leaders in order to move forward.
Thank you. A final question to you, and this is another thing that's coming in from everyone. You know, you spoke about the performance measurement of companies. And as someone who's been following this stream for quite some time now, we've seen from the time of Milton Friedman, the business of business is business, to the time of John Elkington, when he wrote his very famous book, Cannibals with Forks, the triple bottom line of the 21st century, where we had profit, people, and planet standing on its head. That concern about what is the new yardstick, the bottom lines of companies.
Hmm.
How do we get business leaders? How do we get people to come on board and say, we need new performance yardsticks? Today, the quarterly return of the balance sheet is not an indicator of success. This is something that we need to inculcate in the minds of our students, in the minds of all of those who are associated with us on our boardrooms, as stakeholders, as everyone across the board. in what way can that change be brought about?
Right. I think that this is the most important question today, at least in my mind. I present it in the following way. I personally think that in economics, we can do some stuff, but not that much. I don't think it's finance. We have done a lot. So there is huge research on externalities and all these things. Finance can do some work, but also not that much. Today, the spotlight is on accounting. And if there are accountants in the audience, please focus on this. Without accounting, we cannot move forward. I am very excited about the impact-weighted accounts initiative at Harvard Business School, which was started by George Seraphim and headed by Ronnie Cohen as the chair. I'm actually also on that advisory panel. You can go and look at their calculations. They looked at 1,700 companies. If I'm not wrong, I think it's about 25% to 30% of the companies will have their profit completely wiped out, going into negative if they have to pay for the pollution and the environmental costs. So they develop actually a methodology of calculating the costs of their externalities and recalculate all these. There are a lot of initiatives today that are working on this. We're starting one also at INSEAD to understand how to build new accounting principles. Because if our accounting principles are only focused on financial capital and financial returns, then that's what people will try to maximize. And if you include some other measures, I had a conversation with Ronnie Cohen. Again, Ronnie Cohen is the founder of Apex Partners and chairing this initiative. I think we talked 3 years ago, and we're talking about models of exactly your question, Dr. Chatterjee, about how do we come about this? How do we measure all these things? And in my view, my statement on this is that we understand the trade-off between risk and return. The beautiful models built on risk-return trade-off, and also people receive Nobel Prizes for these models. And I think that there is now a Nobel Prize waiting for the person who will figure out the trade-off between impact, risk, and return. Because if we really want to measure these things, you have to build a model of this trade-off, so that we know I'm willing to give up 2 percentage points of my return, endure higher risk, but then I will get X impact out of that. And once I know this trade-off, I can make my decisions. Otherwise, it's very difficult to do this. But these are difficult questions. So.
May I?
Thank you, Professor Mihov. What can I say? It's been such a wonderful experience listening to you, Professor. We are proud that you now chair the global PRME movement as you speak to all of the stakeholders in PRME across the planet, across the globe. Your words, the passion that you bring to this element inspires us. Let me let you go now. I know that you have a very busy schedule ahead of you. But before you do that, all I'll say is that you leave us more motivated than we've ever been in the past, more inspired, more tuned in to the way that we need to completely reset our minds, our thinking. We wish you all the best in this new assignment. And let me assure you from all of us here at the IILM, our full backing in every possible way. Please reach out to us whenever you feel like, and please also give us the liberty of reaching out to you when we have a need.
Sure.
Thank you
Absolutely.
ever so much for sparing.
Thank you very much, and good luck for the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Right then, that was wonderful. A very riveting experience for all of us, and I'm sure everyone who's been viewing this video conference would have been moved by such an impactful leader. The words he left us with were also very important, and I think I'll make that the platform of what I'm about to say to all of you, is that the impact we create. Let me begin with IILM itself as an institution. What have we embodied over this last almost an entire decade? The institution itself has come to stand for something that is valuable for society. The values that drive IILM, the values that drive not just the leadership, the entire faculty, and the way we disseminate information, the way we conduct our classes, the cross-cutting belief in the fact that when we speak to young minds, when we try and bring tomorrow's generation into the mainstream of society, what values do we inculcate in them? And deeply ingrained in the value system of the IILM is that conviction that you need to go beyond just the bottom line. Today, business leaders, companies are so much more accountable to society. Society has expectations that it had never had before from business leaders and companies. We expect you not just to perform as engines of profit, but as engines of development, of engines of inclusiveness, in engines of bringing society onto a different platform where values other than just the bottom line matter. And because IILM has espoused these qualities in its very DNA, I remember, and maybe I get sentimental here, uh, the late Mr. Kamal Singh, who literally lived by these values and who for IILM was such an asset, and we've lost him today. That is such a tragic loss. Yes, to us in the IILM, but to the United Nations Global Compact, to the entire PRME movement. 2017, when he and I stood in New York and we declared before that clapping, cheering audience the start of the India chapter, it literally brings tears to my eyes that how he and I held hands and showed the world that India was very much in the mainstream of the PRME movement, and the UN Global Compact, India, the IILM, and all of us were joined at the hip in believing in what we needed to do, in literally walking the talk here. And that conviction radiates today and across the entire planet, and we want to live up to that as an institution, and then of course in the larger world of higher education, management education, and of course with the way that India goes. Having said that, let's look at the little larger piece here. If we go outside just our institution, the way that PRME now needs to go forward. As I said to Professor Mihov, we have been at the at the cutting edge, at the forefront of the PRME movement in India. There has to be far, far more engagement and awareness of what this PRME stands for. And it is inextricably linked with the SDGs. We have today a very evolved and extremely conscious and aware Niti Aayog. The way that they monitor the SDGs, the way that they speak of it at every single platform, and the way that they engage every single stakeholder on SDGs, the measurement tools that India has devised beyond just the ones given to us by the United Nations, they are hallmarks, they are benchmarks of the way in which India today is taking that leadership in the world of SDGs. We know from experience that the Millennium Development Goals were not very successful. If there was any one country that succeeded in getting somewhere on the MDGs, it was China. But today, all eyes are on us. They are on India. Our performance in this decade and a half are going to make a material difference to the score sheet of the planet, of our entire globe. We will be literally the focal point of interest for everyone to say, how has India done? And when we do well, led by our Prime Minister, who incidentally played such an incredible role in the Paris Accord, and it warms the cockles of my heart that post the Trump era, the US, which literally walked out of the Paris Accord, is now back, and back to understanding that we need to be accountable as countries everywhere to the fact that the SDGs must be driven forward by a greater and greater energy, exponentially increasing with each passing day. That's the vision that our Prime Minister has given us. That's the vision that our nation has before us. And that's where our Prime Minister speaks at every platform with such feeling and with such commitment. That is why it resonates in every corner of this globe, of this country, to each of us in our own homes, in our institutions, in our professions. So that commitment really needs to be taken forward. Professor Mihov also spoke about how much the private sector, the public sector, and the civil society sector all have to come together and work in total synergy. I recall even now that when we were framing Section 135 of the Companies Act of 2013 for that epic law on CSR, these were the very thoughts that we policymakers had in our minds. And if you look at the way the CSR has evolved as an important part of the way SDGs are taken forward, it is that triangle, that triumvirate of the government as a facilitator, of the civil society sector and the private sector working in close harmony, in close synergy. It is that magical effect that ultimately has to transform into success that we achieve in ensuring that our planet, our people are first protected much better than our profits. So we've set, India has set many benchmarks, the one I spoke about now being one of them. But thereafter, we need to continuously go forward. So how does the future look? What should we do? We are recovering. Yes, the COVID pandemic, I prefer to call it the China virus. The fact is that it has hit the globe hard. It has hit India very, very hard. At one point, we lost a quarter of our GDP. But these last few months have also shown us that the green shoots of recovery are literally visible. We don't have to go around with a microscope to locate them. I work in the steel sector. We were hit so hard. But perhaps among all the pillars of the economy, the steel sector has recovered the fastest and the quickest. And it's not because we have done something special. It's because the business climate in India, the way the government policies have gone forward, that we've got this chance to grab and to take forward. So as we do this, we realize that in our recovery process, we must also keep in mind the green recovery portion, which is a part of what we are discussing here today. We learned many new paradigms during the shutdown, during the meltdown. The lessons that we have learned when adversity really hit us, those are the lessons we must carry forward. In our renewed commitment, we must understand that the SDGs need to go forward at an even faster pace than ever before. We need to keep them in mind. Technologies also have, in this COVID-19 period, many new technologies have actually been discovered. How do we tap into them? How do we absorb them? How do we imbibe them? And how do we make it part of our recovery process? And finally, the social perspectives. These can never be lost sight of. Can we have jobless growth? Can we have growth that is also mindless? At the center of everything that we do, our economy needs to be taken forward. And the way we deal with the downtrodden, the marginalized in our society becomes really the litmus test of how this country is going to move forward. So to conclude, I'll only say that the entire PRME movement today, re-energized, rejuvenated, goes forward. We at IILM are proud to be a part of it as a flag bearer and a torch bearer of that movement. And with the legacy that people like Mr. Kamal Singh have left us, let us pledge, recommit as we do every year to the PRME movement, to the United Nations Global Compact, to the SDGs, and make this particular event this year another landmark in the proud history of IILM. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee, for always such an eloquent and thoughtful elucidation of the role of PRME and SDGs and how we at IILM can contribute to that role. I will now request Dr. Sujata Shahi, Vice Chancellor, IILM University, to give the concluding remarks. Dr. Shahi is a professor in the area of organizational behavior and human resources and has an experience of over 26 years. Dr. Sujata Shahi.
Thanks, Dr. Bidisha. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be here for the 8th PRME conference on planning for a green recovery, business, technology, and social perspectives organized by IILM. As the legacy continues, I would like to thank all the panelists, participants, faculty, students, and management for organizing such an important event, which will create awareness about the importance of sustainable green recovery. I would like to thank Professor Ilian Mihov for honoring this session with his inspirational thoughts. Professor Mihov has left us with a thought to work on, like education is key to change the current situation and move towards green recovery by making people responsible towards present and future. And also, he talked about, think about this change could be painful or smooth. I sincerely thank Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee for kindly accepting our invitation and gracing this inaugural function. Sir, you rightly talked about value system and the way we are responsible about society to inculcate these values. Also, sincere thanks to all present dignitaries for taking out time and supporting us with their valuable suggestions. As we know, India moves towards building back better. The key aspects of building back better entail delivering new jobs and business through a clean, green transition, achieving green jobs and sustainable growth. From India's perspective, it will be important to promote sustainable agriculture, resource efficiency across sectors, and supply chains to help get benefit at local level. India's response to COVID-19 crisis has been timely and comprehensive. It is a judicious mix of relief packages and systematic liquidity infusion measures. Since beginning, IILM is committed to the principles of responsible management education in letter and spirit. And our value that stand out is a deep commitment to sustainable development and a green environment. The transformation needed for a cleaner and green planet requires integrative, innovative, and creative thinking, cultivated jointly by schools, universities, governments, civil society organizations, and companies. Series of conferences IILM has organized to inculcate the importance of sustainability into our curricula, research, pedagogy, and the student experience. IILM thinks beyond the simple transfer of knowledge and desirable behaviors by developing empowered, critical, mindful, and competent citizens. The topic of green recovery is even more important, especially after the pandemic, for both humanity and our planet, and the need for informed decision-making to support a green recovery greater than ever. Through the understanding of green recovery, we have the opportunity to unleash innovation, undertake research in critical sectors, and make use of environmentally sustainable projects. I hope through this two-day conference, we would be able to convey the importance of sharing experiences and learning from best practices, cutting-edge technology, business models, including challenges and failures, to build greater awareness of green and resilient recovery strategies. Once again, thank you all for being here, and all the best for the upcoming sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shahi. With this, we come to the end of the inaugural session of the 8th PRME conference. We will begin our 3 plenaries on business, design, and law tomorrow at 10 a.m. Do join us then. I also invite you to visit our second Sustainability Carnival being held concurrently with this conference in virtual mode. Thank you everyone for being here. Take care and stay safe.